I found my ex-wife's name on the list my tenant hid in the basement. She was circled in red, and next to her was a date, the day after tomorrow. But when the police arrived, the entire room was completely empty.
I never thought I'd be the type of person to rent out part of my house to a stranger, but after my divorce, money got tight. The mortgage wasn't going to pay itself, and the basement apartment I'd finished years ago was just sitting empty. So I posted an ad online and waited. Most of the responses were normal enough. College students, young professionals, the usual crowd. But then I got a message from someone named Chen. His email was brief and polite. He said he was a night shift worker at a data center and needed a quiet place to sleep during the day. He offered to pay 3 months up front in cash. I needed the money, so I said yes. Martin moved in on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. The leaves were just beginning to turn, and there was a chill in the air that promised winter wasn't far off. He pulled up in an old sedan, rust showing along the edges. He was in his mid-30s, rail-thin, with dark circles under his eyes that made him look perpetually exhausted. His skin had an unhealthy pallor, like someone who hadn't seen sunlight in months. He didn't have much stuff, just 2 battered suitcases and a laptop bag that he clutched protectively against his chest. When I extended my hand for a handshake, his palm was cold and slightly damp. He barely made eye contact when we went over the house rules. His gaze kept drifting past my shoulder, as if he was looking at something behind me. I told him he could use the side entrance to come and go without disturbing me. He seemed relieved by this, almost eager. He nodded quickly and disappeared down the basement stairs without another word. For the first week, everything seemed fine. I barely knew he was there. I'd hear the side door open around 6 in the evening when he left for work, and it would close again around 7 in the morning. During the day, the house was silent. It was almost like living alone again. But then I started noticing small things. The first was the smell. Around the second week, there was this faint odor coming from the basement door. It wasn't exactly rotten, but it was organic and unpleasant, like wet soil mixed with something metallic. I knocked on the basement door one afternoon to ask Martin about it, but there was no answer. I figured he was sleeping and let it go. The second thing was the scratching. I first heard it late one night when I was watching TV in the living room, trying to distract myself with some mindless sitcom. It was coming from the floor beneath me, right where the basement ceiling would be. It sounded like fingernails on wood, slow and deliberate, almost rhythmic. Scratch, 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 then a pause. Then it would start again. The pattern repeated for several minutes. I muted the television and sat there in the flickering light, straining to hear. My heart was beating faster than it should have been. I told myself it must be pipes or the house settling, even though I knew what pipes sounded like, and this wasn't it. This sounded intentional, purposeful, like someone was trying to send a message. The third thing happened when I went down to the basement to check the water heater. I should mention that Martin's apartment was separated from the utility area by a locked door. I had the only key. But when I went down there, I found the door to his apartment slightly ajar. The smell hit me immediately, much stronger now. I called out his name, but there was no response. I knew I shouldn't go in. It was his private space, and I'd promised him privacy. But something felt wrong. I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The apartment was almost completely dark. The windows I'd installed were covered with thick black fabric, blocking out every bit of daylight. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out shapes in the dimness. The furniture I'd left down there, a couch, a small table, a bed, was pushed against the walls. The center of the room was empty, except for a large circular pattern drawn on the concrete floor in what looked like white chalk. But it was the walls that made my blood run cold. They were covered in papers, hundreds of sheets, maybe thousands, taped up in overlapping layers, each one filled with handwritten text in a language I didn't recognize. The characters were angular and strange, sharp and precise, nothing like any alphabet I'd ever seen. Some looked almost like ancient runes, others like mathematical equations mixed with occult symbols. And in between the papers were photographs, dozens of them, perhaps more than 100, pictures of people I'd never met, all taken from a distance with what must have been a telephoto lens. Street photography, candid shots, people going about their daily lives, completely unaware they were being watched. A woman buying coffee, a man walking his dog, children playing in a park. Each photo was labeled with a date and time in small, meticulous handwriting. In the corner of the room, barely visible in the shadows, was something that looked like an altar. Black candles, unlit, surrounded a small wooden box that looked ancient and weathered. The box had strange carvings on its surface, symbols that matched some of the writing on the walls. Next to it was a leather-bound notebook, open to a page filled with names and dates. I took a step closer, my legs feeling weak beneath me. I recognized some of the names. They were people from the neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson from 3 houses down, the mailman who delivered my packages, the teenager who mowed lawns in the summer. And there, near the bottom of the list, circled 3 times in red ink, was my ex-wife's name. Next to it was a date, only 2 days away. I backed out of the apartment slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. I went upstairs, locked my bedroom door, and called the police. I told them I had a tenant who was acting suspiciously, that I'd found disturbing materials in his apartment. They said they'd send someone over to check it out. While I waited, I did something stupid. I looked up Martin Chen online. I should have done this before letting him move in, but I'd been desperate for the money. What I found made my stomach drop. There was no one by that name working at any data center in the area. But there was a news article from 3 years ago about a man named Martin Chen who'd been arrested for stalking and harassment. The photo in the article was definitely him. According to the report, he'd become obsessed with a woman he'd met online, convinced that she was part of some kind of cosmic destiny he needed to fulfill. The charges had been dropped on a technicality. The police arrived about 30 minutes later. 2 officers came to the door, and I explained the situation. We went down to the basement together, but when we got there, the door to Martin's apartment was closed and locked from the inside. The officers knocked and announced themselves. No answer. They asked me to open it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. When we finally got the door open, the apartment was empty, completely empty. No furniture pushed against the walls, no papers, no photographs, no altar. The chalk circle on the floor was gone. Even the smell had disappeared. The windows were uncovered, letting in the gray afternoon light. It looked exactly the way I'd left it when I'd finished renovating years ago. The police looked at me like I was wasting their time. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but even to my own ears it sounded insane. They did a cursory check of the space, found nothing, and told me to call them if the tenant came back. Then they left. I went back upstairs and sat in my kitchen, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had I imagined it all? Was I losing my mind? But I knew what I'd seen. The papers, the photos, the names in that notebook. It had been real. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, listening for any sound from the basement. Around 3 in the morning, I heard the side door open.
Footsteps on the basement stairs, the door to Martin's apartment closing softly. He was back.
I grabbed my phone and ran out the front door to my car. I drove to a hotel and checked in for the night. In the morning, I called a locksmith and had him change all the locks on the house, including the side entrance. Then I went back, walked down to the basement, and knocked on the apartment door. Martin answered. He looked the same as always, tired and pale, with those dark circles under his eyes. He stared at me without expression. I told him he had to leave. I said I was terminating the rental agreement, effective immediately, and that he had 24 hours to get his things out. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly and closed the door. The next day, I checked the basement. He was gone. The apartment was empty and clean, just like it had been when the police came. I never saw him again, and he never asked for his deposit back. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that scratching sound coming from beneath the floor. And when I go outside to check my mailbox, I get the feeling that someone is watching me from a distance, camera in hand, adding my photo to a collection I'll never see. I sold the house 3 months later and moved across the state. I never rented to anyone again.